Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Lang. I'm the Vice-Rector for Research and Human Resources here at WU, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our WU Matters event. I have nothing against foreigners, but. And in today's discussion, we want to shed light on the different sides of internationality. Internationality is an important strategic topic for our university, and in particular for me also as Vice-Rector for Research and Human Resources, and I'm also responsible for diversity management. So WU has been founded in 1980, and since then WU has always been characterized by internationality. Since its foundation, WU has been driven by international outlook, international mobility, and participation in a lot of different international networks. Today, around 30% of our students are international. They come from 100 different countries. Around 30% of our employees, research staff and administrative staff as well, have an international background. And we want to take further measures to increase the number of international students and faculty. And also, which is of course very important for us as a research institution, to increase international research collaborations. So what are the opportunities and the challenges of internationality? What do we have to do to promote good and productive collaboration in international teams? And how can we deal with people and ideas that appear alien to us? How can we reflect upon our own ideas of normality? So our aim for today's discussion, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion today, is to look at the topic from very different points of view. We have a very diverse panel with people from the academic world, but also from the world of music, who lived and worked in many different countries. So I'm very interested in discussing what universities can learn from each other, but also what we can learn from the world of music, for example. So I'm very happy that Rima Hegazi, founding member, presenter, and station voice at FM4, will moderate our discussion today. As information for our international audience that doesn't know FM4, this is a station of Austrian Public Broadcasting Company with a multilingual format and a selection of music outside the mainstream. So Rima, it's my pleasure now to hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Lang, and thank you everybody for joining us here on WU Matters, WU Talks, a diversity talk today. And the focus is on internationality. It has two sides. Well, for me, it has way more than two sides. You know, when I got the offer to host this wonderful event, I thought to myself, I wonder why they've chosen me. And then it took me about 5 seconds of thinking about it to realize, oh yeah. So basically what it comes down to is, my name is Rima Hegazi. That's an Arabic name, an Egyptian name, a Muslim name. And I was born in Cairo to an Austrian mom, my birth mom being Austrian, and to an Egyptian father. Now, when I was born in 1970, my father decided that he wanted to give his little baby a different sort of opportunity in life. And at that time, in 1970, Australia and Canada were offering packages to entice people to immigrate to Canada and Australia. And because, at least this is how the story goes, my father understood the Canadian accent better than the Australian accent, I ended up shoveling snow for 9 months a year instead of lying on Bondi Beach. I'm not complaining though, because I'm really happy to have grown up in Canada. When I was 18, though, I was an Austrian citizen as well as a Canadian citizen, and I decided to take advantage of that and come and study in Vienna at the main Vienna University. So then fast forward a few years, I had an opportunity to start working for the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation for the mainstream youth-oriented station at the time, Ö3. And a couple of years after I started in 1995, a group of like-minded colleagues got together and put a concept on the table to the bosses at the ORF saying, we would like to have a platform where it's all about inclusivity, and it doesn't matter if your first language isn't German, that does not make you not Austrian. And lo and behold, we actually had an opportunity to start FM4, FM4, where our motto is, you're at home, baby, and that kind of sums it all up. So the thing about it is, when I'm in Egypt and I meet people that I don't know, the first thing they say is like, where are you from? And in Austria, that happens to me a lot too. People want to know, like, where are you from? And in Canada, weirdly, nobody asked me that. And because I gained a stepmom from America, I also have an American family. And when I've been in the United States, that's also been a question right away. Where are you from? And so internationality, it's hard to define what that word is, but it weirdly defines me. So that's a little background to me, and that's also the way that I've come to understand how I had this opportunity to host this event. So having said that, I'd like to introduce you to the members of the panel here on our discussion today. And I'd like to start out with, and you will please forgive me if I sometimes look down and not straight at you because I'm just referring to my notes. I'd like to start with an introduction to Shalini Randeria, the rector of the Institute for Human Sciences, Institut für Wissenschaften von Menschen in Vienna, professor of social anthropology and sociology at the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies in Geneva. Hello. Not sure exactly if this is working. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. I was muted. So yes, thank you very much.
Hello, nice to see you. All right, next up on our panel, who I'd like to introduce, that would be Majid Gamis. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Please correct it. If not, Associate Professor of English Literature and Criticism and member of Scholars at Risk. Hello.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Also joining us, Marie-Thérèse, Professor and Head of the Institute for Gender and Diversity in Organizations at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. Hello.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
And also joining us, Hubert von Goizan. And I'm going to be completely transparent and honest here. Hubert von Goizan has been accompanying me for many, many years, not just on the radio, but in my heart. I'm a huge fan. That's just how it is. World musician and singer-songwriter, Hubert von Goizan. Christi.
Hello, servus. Hello, everybody.
All right, well, to start off the discussion, I just want to throw it out there now. Generally speaking, or specifically speaking, what does internationality mean to you? I'll start with Ms. Randeria.
Well, this depends on from what perspective I should answer your question. So as somebody who's been at European universities teaching, researching since 40 years, internationality has always in European universities meant looking towards the US. International students, sending students out abroad, it has always been a very Western-centric internationality. So to diversify that has taken a very long time. One is willing to somehow take in students from other parts of the world, but the faculties in continental European universities are anything but diverse. There is hardly anyone from the global south who is teaching in any of these universities in France, Belgium, Germany, Switzerland, Austria. Britain is a different story. But I think, so internationality from that perspective at the university has been rather one-sided. We can think about many other ways. For me personally, it has meant in terms of my biography, I was born in Washington, D.C. in the US. I grew up in India. I studied in Oxford, then took my PhD in Heidelberg. I did my habilitation at the Free University I started my PhD in Heidelberg. I took my PhD and my habilitation both at the Free University of Berlin. I was teaching at the CEU in Budapest. Then I was teaching for many years in Berlin, in Switzerland, and now since 6 years here. So internationality for me has meant the freedom to be mobile across all of these borders, to be able to cross them easily, and to teach and research in all of these very different contexts.
Right. And now I'll go to Marie-Thérèse Kiatz. Would you like to give a comment on what internationality is? It's something that you certainly are immersed in big time.
Well, thank you. Well, internationality depends, as Shalini said, it depends on what kind of level. The personal level, of course, it means that you're mobile and also that you meet people, a lot of people wherever you go. Even if you stay at home, you meet a lot of people from different nationalities, etc. Then, of course, as you're working at a university, you have a lot of international students, and luckily this has been increasing over the years. All these exchange students coming from all over the place, working together, which is sometimes a challenge at the beginning, especially. You know, it was quite adapting to it. It is also working, for example, for companies doing consulting or training in companies where diversity is a big issue. And that is also always an experience, a very, very nice experience. We always learn from each other every day, of course. And, you know, on the personal level, on the professional level, internationality is everywhere. I mean, even if you don't move, you meet people like you from Riem, from all over the place, wherever you are nowadays. So internationality starts with us at home, I would say.
All right, and I'll just move right on with the same question, or not question, but the request to talk about what internationality means to you. Majid Mugamis?
Yeah, I'll be addressing these questions from the point of view of a Middle Eastern scholar. So I'll talk from this perspective. For a Middle Eastern scholar, like we have been accustomed to understand internationality as accepting basically students from other countries, as simple as that. So it has been limited to students, basically. We rarely think of internationality in terms of scholars. We rarely have scholars who, we do like, but it is majorly students from different countries. So internationality is limited to students, but this is the status quo. But what I understand from internationality is it's blurring the boundaries between several countries where students, scholars, and even outside the academia, borders between the countries are no longer there. And it is that every citizen from any country is part of the country which he lives or studies or teaches in. So this is my understanding of what internationality is.
Okay, thank you very much. Shukran. Okay, moving on to Hubert von Goisen. Same thing.
I've always been interested to listen to the sounds that come from the outside, how music is being played and what kind of feelings it evokes. I remember the first kind of really far away music I heard was Indian music, Ravi Shankar, and of course, music from the United States, jazz musicians, especially from the South, the blues. And very early, I also realized that I didn't like so much when things, when I couldn't understand it. Especially when you have vocal music with lyrics and I don't understand it. Of course, you can fill it with the fantasy, the gaps, but you always know that maybe your fantasy is completely different to the meaning of the song it has. And even the English sung songs that came from England, from the UK, or from America, it took a very long time to really understand metaphors that were used and the language behind the language. And eventually, I grew up in a very traditional place where music was played in a very, very, very traditional way. When I started to develop my own music out of this traditional music with the inspirations from all over the world, I didn't try to sound like Ravi Shankar, or I didn't try to sound like Miles Davis. I just like these kind of approaches. And I tried to get this feeling they had into my way of making music. And then I realized this was not everybody's taste, and I got attacked from all around for polluting the tradition. There were hard fights. And then I really started to dig into the traditions of different cultures, and also of my own, and realizing that just because it's a tradition doesn't mean it's always been that way. Mm-hmm. So no matter where you go to, if you have a strong tradition, you have a very strong feeling towards new things going into this tradition, being at home, or my tradition, or being in Africa with Tuaregs, where I spent some time with them, or in the north of Europe with the Sami people. If you come and bring your own feelings into their tradition, mm-hmm. it makes them feel awkward. And I don't like to make people feel awkward. So I think it's a really, it's a minenfeld. It's a lot of landmines in all these traditions of playing music, but not only music, but also thinking. But to have the windows open and to receive inspiration and to see how other people manage their lives under probably different circumstances, but still it's the same world they're living on. And very many of the things, the challenges that we all meet are similar ones. And it's very inspiring to get an idea that there's not only one way of doing it. Okay. And sometimes it benefits you. Sometimes it doesn't do anything because there's not enough understanding. But it's very, very important for me still to get inspiration from outside.
Okay, what you've just said touches beautifully on the next point that I want to make. And it's not me making this point, it's actually the team at the VU who put together a little description of what this talk was going to be about. And there was one question that they offered up, which I thought was kind of fascinating. And that question is, let me just find it. Right. In a globalized world, how can we deal with people and ideas that appear alien to us? And how can we reflect upon and interrogate our own ideas of normality or normalcy? So for me, when I was thinking about this, of course, I was reflecting on some experiences I've had, and it's strange, but wherever I am, I'm not normal. And so, little example is when I was small, and visiting Großmutter in the Waldviertel, I used to have way more curly hair and way more thick hair. And she used to just, and she used to say, Rima, what kind of a nest have you got on your head? Yeah. And I was convinced that I had bad hair. Yeah. And then when I was in Egypt, my cousins, our family, we have all different shades of skin. And my brother and myself and my cousin Nahla, we are the very lightest. And a lot of our other cousins are somewhat darker. And I had one female cousin who was pretty mean to me. And when I was growing up and she was growing up, I said, why were you so mean to me? And she said, well, I was jealous of you because you're so pretty and you have perfect hair. Do you see what I mean? That kind of like, well, nowhere there, I was normal. So going back to the original question, how do we challenge our ideas of what's considered to be normal or alien? Anybody care to comment?
Yes, I would like to build on what Hubert was saying, actually, because having grown up in a quite international family, you know, listening to music and having the words was not so much of an issue, actually, because, you know, you got used to different languages, etc. But then when I went to Indonesia and I heard the gamelan, that for me was all of a sudden a completely different world. And it really struck me how things, you know, even if they're different, are somehow similar or familiar to you. And then all of a sudden you realize that there is, even in music, a totally different understanding. And now when I listen, for example, to, I don't know, Chinese music, I still have this feeling of it's a different world. And that makes you think, why is this, does it sound so different to me? And what does it do to me in my normalcy, as you call it, right? And what I like so much about this diversity of cultures and music and languages is that you get to know yourself. You become aware, as you said, of who you are and how different you are seen, how you are perceived differently in different contexts, in different situations, and how you do the same thing, how you interpret things and how you perceive things differently. So I think it's always a great awareness exercise of, you know, holding on, standing still and saying, okay, what does this mean to me? And always question yourself in a certain sense. What is normal? What is things you know, and what you can learn from what is new?
Mm-hmm. I often think that, like, what is foreign anymore? You know what I mean? Majid, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think this idea of normality is rooted in what is philosophically known as the idea of absolute truth. To different extents, almost every person believes that there is some sort of an absolute truth that someone holds, maybe he himself. So what we need to do is start from this root, like obliterating this idea of absolute truth. Absolute truth doesn't exist. If we start from here, we can build up a culture where I come to believe that my values, my beliefs, my behavior is not the only correct things. It is not the one, and the others are the other. So, and I think universities can play a very important role in this by teaching basically two things: history and culture. By teaching history, I come to teach students that to show them how certain values change over time, that what you believe in nowadays was not as such in the past. And these things have changed altogether from time to time. When I also teach different cultures in the same period, I teach students how even within the same time frame, different values exist in different cultures. So this will instill in students the idea that there is no specific absolute truth in terms of values, beliefs, dogmas, ideas, way of dresses, like from even the highest to the lowest kind of values that people believe in or practice. So I think in terms of academic atmosphere, we can play a very important role in normalizing the abnormal, let's say. So this is my input about this.
Thank you. And just a little in-between piece of information for anybody who's watching. If you'd like to submit any questions, of course you can in the chat or in the comments, and we'll address your questions, of course, if you have any. So bring them on. All right, Miss or Hubert, have you got anything that you'd like to add to what we've just discussed?
Well, the thing that comes to mind is, as far as internationalities goes, is my experience is the more you do it to go out and meet and connect with people with a completely different background and way of playing music, and the more you develop a language of your own that is an international one. And I experienced, because I'm doing it since quite a while, I do realize that I have this advantage to somebody who's never done this before. And me always looking for some white spots on the globe, and I like to go to places where few people go. I'm very, very often in the position of being the experienced one in dealing with cross-culture musicianship to my partners. The most important part is to really hold yourself back and make room for the other to enter your terrain. And most of us, we grow up in claiming our stake, or making our claim and saying, this is my field, this is where I'm doing my stuff. And then, but if you want to connect, you have to really clean this and say, please be my guest. And this is, it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of time. It's not something that happens quickly. It takes years sometimes to experience and to develop a trust, a mutual trust. In some ways, it's very, very often been very, very frustrating. And these are things you don't want to really talk about, because you don't want to discourage people who have this spirit of wanting to do it. You don't want to come up with examples where it didn't work. But it takes guts, it takes time. And I find that young people have an advantage. They are less prejudiced and biased. It's easier than to work with old people, but I think maybe after a certain age, when you're over the top, it becomes easier again, because you're so relaxed, nobody can take anything away from you anyway. I found it very frustrating to connect with countries that are really close to us culturally, like America or UK. I do have friends there. I do have musicians, friends there, but it's been very difficult to find people who want to come out. And I think I've read something that America, even though it's such an open society, or was until shortly, it only has 8% of imports that is going to America. I'm not talking about music, but talking about general, everything. So these countries, these English-speaking countries, America and UK, they're really flooding us.
Yeah.
And so many people trying to be like them and not really making connections with this culture, but be like that in order to become a global player as well. It's something that's not always easy, and I realize I have to overcome my own barriers that have been built up over the years. For many years when I was young, these countries were like, that's where it's happening, and now I feel, and this is maybe a positive effect of this Trump era, that now it's been reduced. He reduced America to a player like everybody else. Sorry for becoming political.
No. Now, of course, I've got that song, Americanos, Blue Jeans and Chinos, Pepsi and Oreos in my mind from Frankie Goes to Hollywood from the old days. Anyways, I was, when you just now mentioned how difficult it is to talk about these issues, it just gave me a memory that just happened this past week. After Harry and Meghan's big interview with Oprah, I did a story about it for FM4, and I spoke to a biracial expert on diversity in media who had been awarded an MBE, a sort of award of excellence that you get from the Queen of England. The reason I'm telling you this is because I wrote that as the introduction and the intro to my audio piece. And then a colleague of mine who's British, who's an editor, rewrote the cue, and I had explained what an MBE is, and I had said the British monarchy and not the Queen, because since Black Lives Matter of last summer, I've been hyper aware of how anglicized or how Western-centric, something Ms. Randeria touched on at the beginning of this discussion, how submerged I am in it. And now I'm really, really sensitive to making sure that I don't, carry this on, or at least fix my ways. Anyways, my British colleague changed the cue and it became a huge discussion in the redaction, She was like, everybody knows what an MBE is. And I was like, no, they don't. So does anybody care to touch on the massive subject of our Western-centric, Anglocentric, I guess, submersion of art and history and education?
I can, if nobody wants to. I mean, it's, as you say, a massive topic. Yeah. And it is actually that, look at the business schools, business education. The textbooks are American, the cases are American. We are very much, especially in business education, actually, very much influenced by the American ways of doing that. The word management is an American invention in a certain way, right? So that certainly is that. And but I think more and more we are aware of that, and we are developing our own stuff, our own ways of doing it. It hasn't always worked well. For example, when we teach in Asia, this is something that I think is very important in internationality and with international students, etc. What do we adapt? Of course, we use English, but do we adapt our material to, is it an international audience? Do we adapt our material to them? The kind of language we speak, do we adapt? How Eurocentric or US-centric or whatever, Western-centric, are we aware of that? Are we aware of the material that we use or the language we use? the cases that we use and the projects that we work on, etc. So that's it is a fact that I think Majid understands this idea very well, and there is no one truth, and there is no one way of doing things. And certainly in business nowadays, this is what we teach, and this is what we do as well. So we are taking into consideration the variety and the diversity of students, of colleagues that we have, students that we have from all over the world, and the input that they can bring, and the richness of that kind of experience into our diverse groups, actually, and using that experience and making everybody aware of that, of the differences, and sometimes very, very surprising. A stupid example, there are no examples that are stupid, but an example would be, I remember that I had a group of students, and one was a Danish girl, and at a certain moment she said to me, "Oh, Marie-Thérèse, do you have a copy of that?" And I saw my Eastern European, Korean, etc. students shrink, really shrink. And I knew what was happening. So I let them go for the break. And after the break, this poor Danish girl came back to me in tears, saying, "Everybody said that I was so rude, using your first name instead of saying professor." And of course, then we can discuss this. You know, this is what we do in our country. This is normal for us. But everybody had been, "Oh, how dare you, being so rude, so impolite, etc." You know, how can we learn from each other? Everything we do and everything, the way we think we are doing in a natural way, we get challenged all the time when we have these diverse teams. And that is so interesting. You know, you have all these outsiders to your own culture. Mm-hmm. And they challenge your thinking, and they challenge what you do and what you say. And that is of course, fantastic.
You just actually highlighted something for me. I rudely said Majid, but do you guys mind if we are all on the first name basis for the purposes of this discussion? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, can I throw it to you, Ms. Khandria, or if you don't mind, Shalini, with regards to, or just to expand upon this notion of Western-centric or Eurocentric education that here in Austria, certainly, and I know for a fact my Canadian education is absolutely, or was submerged in up until now?
So it's a complex question. I think there are many levels at which you can address it. The first would be the question of just internationality as a term for students. When you say international students, they're already not on the same plane. Think in Austria, you have in a way a two-class system. These are so-called students von Drittstaaten. So they're coming from outside of the EU. They are paying very different fees. So they are paying 700 and something euros for a semester, whereas all of the ones who are considered insiders, nationals as well as EU nationals, are paying 18 euros, right? Mm-hmm. So you already have a distinction between, so they're all international students, but not international students are the same. So we really have to think of the terms of geographical hierarchies of power, of resources, of unequal distribution of knowledge, and of epistemological weight that is given to different languages. So English, of course, is a very different weight globally than any of the other languages, Arabic, for example, or Hindi in India. So I think we have to think of this internationality in a lot of asymmetries rather than it being a flat field of something which is outside of your national boundaries. So this would be the first point I would want to make. The second thing I think, which is interesting to think about, is the question of normalcy, which you were bringing up. So I was listening to Hubert, and I was thinking to myself, when he was talking about Ravi Shankar, I said, what was for me alien music? And the interesting thing was, for us growing up in India, I grew up with Bob Dylan, right? But I didn't think Bob Dylan was, or Leonard Cohen, I didn't think they were alien. What did I think was alien music? I thought pentatonic music was alien music because two notes were missing. I just couldn't get used to a pentatonic music from Southeast Asia because I kept thinking something is missing in this music. So there is something about familiarity, but that familiarity has nothing to do with whether things are far away, because you know, a lot of Southeast Asia is just geographically so much closer to India than the US. And yet Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen in English, the lyrics you could relate to. I grew up during the Vietnam War. I grew up during the anti-Vietnam War protests. The songs are, you know, so Joan Baez, we grew up with her, never thought this was alien, this is far away, this doesn't mean anything. Because it was a language you understood. And it was a political context you understood. But suddenly 2 notes disappear from the scale and you think this is, you know, alien. So I think the notions is not about geographic distance. So many things so many views these days in our own society are also foreign to us. Like when I listen to the demonstrators who are demonstrating these days in all our countries, Austria, Switzerland, Germany, in the US as well, who are anti-vax, who are spouting all of these conspiracy theories about the vaccine and COVID doesn't exist. These guys are as foreign to me. Yeah, anybody anywhere in the world who is in a university, be they in Korea or Japan, is not foreign, but these political views are. So I think the question of where the foreignness comes from is a very difficult question. It's not easy to pinpoint on people's nationalities, geographies, things in your own society can be very, very foreign to you, and people's views in your own society can be very foreign to you. So that's why the question of Eurocentrism is a complicated question depending on from where you're looking at it. Now, if you're thinking in terms of, and this picks up on a point Majid was making earlier on the absolute truth about cultures. So the question about Eurocentrism is the dominance of the West, and this is both Europe and the US, in setting curricula, in setting disciplinary boundaries, in producing knowledge in a way that they set themselves up as the measure of what is normal.
Yeah.
Everything else has to be measured in terms of that. And this is the basis of most of social sciences modernization theory, because it's all about the others are underdeveloped, they need to catch up with us, they will, you know, so it's what you would call a lag theory or a lack theory. They lack something, which we have, or they're not there yet. So it's always turning geographical distances into a historical, temporal, evolutionary scale where some people are behind us. So it's not just a question of truth, but it's about setting yourself up as the measure of normalcy, the measure of what is valuable, and everything else has to be measured and found wanting according to that scale. So I think that's one problem. The question, however, in curriculum, which Marie-Thérèse was raising is, so what do you do when you're faced with this kind of massive Eurocentrism in curricula? You can either, if you come from Korea or Japan or Nigeria or India, say, we're going to take Indian case studies, we are going to teach in Nigerian writers. Is that nationalist reflex the best answer to Eurocentrism? And I think it's a problematic reflex because it basically, everybody retreats into their own particularities. And it takes up a point that Hubert was making beforehand, right at the beginning, when he said, when he started experimenting with jazz and Ravi Shankar, people said, you are losing the purity of your traditions. And I think the whole talk about purity of traditions, of hybridity, but hybridity is also only about pure traditions being mixed. Then things become hybrid. But hybridity presumes a purity, which was never there. So hybridity, I think, is a very problematic concept. So the point here would be, if you retreat from Eurocentrism, if your answer to Eurocentrism of curricula is to say, in Korea, we teach Korean examples, in India, we should teach Indian history, in Nigeria, we should be reading Nigerian literature rather than British literature, I think this is the wrong answer to the problem of Eurocentrism. I think two other things could help us out of this. One is to realize the fact that although Europe tells a story about itself as if its modernity is sui generis, that Europe just evolved out of itself, Europe is a product of imperialism. Europe is a product of colonialism. Europe is a product of what I have written a lot about, entangled histories. So Europe is a product of the interaction with the rest of the world. It took from the rest of the world economic resources. It brought cultural ideas, political ideas to the other parts of the world. So the interaction is what formed both Europe and other parts of the world. So I think the reflex should be to think about the connections in our histories, the overlaps, the differences and similarities, and then to build curricula which are cosmopolitan curricula, which are inclusive, rather than to retreat into another exclusivism as an answer to Eurocentrism. It's a long way to answer your question, but I think the other debate which I want to just remind people of here in terms of question you were asking about normalcy is, don't forget, the normalcy in Europe has always become defined in terms of national cultures. So in German, the term is always Leitkultur. So the Leitkultur is the culture of the majority. So it's not about absoluteness of truth, but it's about the ethnic majority, religious majority saying, we define what normalcy in this society is, and anyone who is not a member ethnically of this group is the immigrant, the refugee, the other, the cultural other. And that person is then somebody who is defined automatically as the other of that normal. So it's very much about majorities and minorities, which we need to think about. How do we break out of this story of national majorities and minorities and the purity of those traditions, which are just non-existent. There never was a pure tradition.
Wow, you've given me a lot to think about, and I can't wait to rewatch this so that I can really dive into it. Majid, do you have any comment or would you like to add on?
I just wanted to pick up on a point mentioned by Teresa when she mentioned about the first name thing as a cultural issue between, I would say, East and West, calling the professor by his first name rather than saying doctor, blah, blah, blah. I personally had an experience with this because in my culture, it's like doctor, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't even like this when I was there. Once I came to the West, I find it like, it's like you mentioned doctor by his first name, and I find it like it's more humane, it's more friendly, and it does not reduce the respect of any teacher. But still, I'm here speaking about how input from childhood builds up in people so that they can hardly get rid of it. Now, although I believe that this is usual to maybe, it's acceptable at least, to call a doctor by his first name, but still, if it were for me, if I meet my professor now, I would not be able to call him by his first name because it's built in me that it is disrespectful. Although I believe it's not disrespectful, but still I cannot do it. So I just wanted to mention this.
Okay. I'm just going to go to some of these comments on our chat. And Hubert, someone's written here, I think many Americans share my opinion. This is the person who's writing, not me. That we want more media from other countries. We just have perhaps overpowered media conglomerates here pumping out Hollywood, etc. That kind of content. Is there a possibility that multiculturalism and diversity is changing local and regional culture in a way that young people lose their traditional values?
The question to me?
Yeah, that was addressed to you in our chat.
Yeah. Well, I did very often when I went into other cultures, be in Africa or in Asia or in Middle East, or even America, I felt like an intruder with my music. And of course, there's a number of people who are always, or who are interested in hearing new sounds, hearing new ideas and getting inspired. But the majority isn't. The majority likes to be safe with the things they understand and know, even if it doesn't, maybe it's not perfect, but it's safe for them. I very often caught myself saying, Hubert, this is the last trip into a different world that you're doing, because it takes so much energy, so much time, and you are, I don't know what the English word is for zwangsbeglücken.
There isn't one.
There isn't one, okay.
Your forced happiness?
So, and also, when I take my music to Senegal or to the Tibetan community or wherever, or to Egypt, there is quite a big chunk of it that will not be understood and will even be misunderstood, misinterpreted. So that very often I catch myself with the thought, I should stay within the people, within the regions that understand my music, that understand my tongue. But then this would be a very small field, because I'm singing not only in German, I'm singing very often heavy dialect from this region where I'm coming from, where sometimes even young people from my hometown have asked me what I mean, because they don't understand many of the old words anymore. But I'm an inquisitive person, and I always think there are such people like me all over the world. And if I make a few of them happy for raising a few questions, then it's worthwhile, even though it's such a big effort, and even though many people might misunderstand it.
I'm just going to read out a question to the entire panel from Paulina, and that is, dear panel, could you please comment on the point raised in the description of today's event? Having an immigrant background is seen as a disadvantage. What is your experience in this regard? Shall I start with Majid?
Yeah, because I have experience with this, of course.
Yeah, thought so.
I would, like, even when it comes to applications, I will start with this. Like, when I start applying for a visa or for the very question that starts with, are you an EU citizen? It just makes me feel like I am not part of the community. So here this starts. In terms of the academic atmosphere, I would say that I didn't find substantial, let me say, discrimination between those who are from the country and those who have immigrant background. So I don't find it is really a disadvantage in the academic setting itself. But otherwise, since you are living in a European country, you always find this feeling, even in applications. Are you an EU citizen? Where are you from? These things, even if you don't find them practically discriminatory, the very question itself makes you feel that you don't belong. Whatever happens, the very question itself makes you feel that you are the other. So yeah, in this aspect, I find it discomforting.
Yeah, I have that so many times because ich bin Österreicherin. I have Austrian citizenship and Canadian citizenship. My mother's Austrian. I've lived in Austria for over 30 years, durchgehend. But before then, I was always visiting Großmutter and Großvater in the Waldviertel. And it kind of, to this day, makes me angry when people are like, what? You're Austrian? You know? Does Marie-Thérèse, would you like to comment?
just today, actually, I'm going to read what I read today, actually. The British engineer working for a multinational oil company in Trinidad is a British expatriate, an outsider, but not an inferiorized other. However, the female factory worker from Aruba who migrates to Holland to work is constructed as other and is inferiorized. So there's a huge difference between expatriate and a migrant worker. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can see this very much now in the COVID times, because expats still get help, be it from their company, be it from the government of the place where they are. I have some friends and colleagues, for example, in Singapore, but the migrant workers from the Philippines, etc., who are there, get no support at all. So there's, you know, the power issue, and where are you from? Where are you from? And what kind of job do you have? Yeah. So this insider outsider. Yeah. Even in the I would say the foreign workers community in a country. In this country, in Austria, you will have expatriates from big companies from all over the world working here. And you have migrant workers from across the border and from other parts of the world. So yes, it is an issue. It is really an issue of who decides what you are actually. Yeah, expats in a way are not seen. They are different. They are outsiders, but they're not the other. Yeah, whereas migrant workers are otherized very much more. So yeah, that's.
If I may come in on that, I think this is a very important point, because I mean, personally, if you are asking the question, Paulina, the thing is, as an immigrant, you have one disadvantage, which is what I have, which is that I'm paying taxes in 3 European countries and I cannot vote in any of them. So it's taxation without any political representation. This would be the major disadvantage from my personal point of view of being an immigrant. I pay taxes in Switzerland. I, of course, pay taxes in Austria. I pay taxes in Germany. And I have no political rights in any country. So I'm basically politically rightless in a world in which political rights do matter. So that, I think, is one thing we have to really think about, because there are so many people. It's not, I mean, if it was just my story alone, it would just be bad luck for me. But we are talking about millions of migrants in Europe who are all without political rights. So I think this is a very important dimension of disadvantage. In the US, you have ethnically segregated markets. So the entire economic market is ethnically segregated. This is more Marie-Thérèse area of expertise than mine. But what we can show is there are hugely differential wages according to ethnic segregation. So I think there is another dimension there which we have to think about, the disadvantages. But what I want to make is a very fundamental sociological point, and to pick up on what Marie-Thérèse was saying. And that is the very category of the immigrant who counts as an immigrant and is not an expatriate, or is somebody who is considered undesirable, somebody who by definition is unwelcome, and somebody who is defined as such by the receiving state. So who decides whether somebody is an expat or an immigrant? It's the receiving state in society, which decides whether you are an expatriate or whether you're an immigrant. And this is a question of what country you come from. So this is where I think third states, Drittstaaten, is a totally different category from within the EU. But you know, if you just look at the history of immigration, those who were coming from Greece and Yugoslavia into Germany in the 70s and 80s were all considered undesirable immigrants. Once they became members of the EU, they are no longer considered immigrants, they are considered Europeans. So these are very fluid, changing categories in which suddenly it's the Muslim migrant who is the other in Europe, whereas the Greek or the Yugoslav is part of the European self now. So one has to look at these categories in a historical context and see. And of course, the Americans and the Brits are nowhere immigrants. They're always expatriates. So it is also very much a question of the political power and the economic strength of certain nations who have a particular history of the way they have dealt with asymmetries in the rest of the world.
Just read a comment from someone on our chat, which I thought was kind of funny. This person has written, I learned it's very important to people in this country, Austria, to use every title this person's got. It's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not anymore. Not anymore.
You don't think so?
It used to be a big issue a generation ago, but now it's worn off, thank God.
All right. Here is a question too from the chat room. How do you view, okay, well, we've kind of, a few of you have touched on this, but maybe expand if you want. How much do you view internationality as a chance to think about new ways of doing things and to adapt your own best practices?
I agree totally. I really agree. I think it is good to be challenged. We need to be challenged, and people who come with, why do you do it this way, or why do you say that, etc., makes us think, and yeah, and then we learn something new, and it's very important. You know, I really always insist of the importance of the outsider. The outsider needs to challenge you, and it will challenge you, and you have to accept that you are being challenged, and how in what always seemed normal and habitual to you all of a sudden is challenged, right? And then you but why, and how important is it? Does it really touch me on my core values, or is it just peripheral, like the way I dress or whatever it is, etc.? You know, the peripheral values, as I call them. Yeah, but and how are you sometimes challenging your core values? So yes, I think the outsider, only outsiders can change and challenge the system.
Mm-hmm. Majid?
Yeah, I think the benefit is reciprocal between the citizens of the country and the expatriates, or those who have immigrant background. Because in as much as the international scholar or student benefits from his experience from abroad, the citizens of the country also benefit in as much as they have open-mindedness, because they live, and I can see this in my experience. I wouldn't claim that I have taught people different things, but during their like dialogues with me and the treatment with me, like they have come to acquire new knowledge, and they have experienced even they had some practice of being open-minded, accepting the idea that what we have is not the normal model. So there are different models that we should entertain and accept within our culture. So yeah, I think the internationality is reciprocal. So, I mean, beneficial for both the host and the guest himself in the country or in the university.
Okay. I think it's quite interesting that the word race hasn't been used yet, to my knowledge, in this discussion. Does anyone care to comment on that? Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is because
it was partly about race. It was not only about race.
No.
But it was partly about race.
Yeah, but I didn't hear the word.
Imperialism. No, so no. Of course, imperialism is partly about what kinds of geographical hierarchies of place are there, what kinds of imperial labor is there. Just think of the distinction between the two disciplines which I was trained in, and I teach also, sociology and anthropology. What is the difference? The difference is sociology is about the study of modern Western societies, and anthropology is the study of those who are outside of Europe, those who are racially different.
Right.
That's the traditional division of labor between anthropology and sociology, based on a completely colonial view of the world. And the only racially different others, I mean, I put race always in inverted commas, who are taken out of it are the Indian, the Chinese, and the parts of the Middle East, because those were in European universities construed as philological disciplines. So they were Indology, Sinology, und Islamic Wissenschaften. So they are taken out of that. So you have a tripartite division of those whose at least you say they are different from us, but they are civilizations. And Africa, which is not supposed to have a civilization, and Latin America also not. And so you put them into a discipline called anthropology. All European universities still have that same division of labor. Mm-hmm. They all have that same distinction between sociologists and anthropologists, and they are unable to bridge that boundary. And this was, of course, a difference which was predicated on race. It was not only, but also, I mean, it's not the only characteristic. So I think race is very much part of the whole question of how you divide the world in disciplines, how you think about diversity. And the problem, I think, with the label diversity is that it doesn't want to talk about racial differences. It doesn't want to talk about class differences, etc. Because if we think about, if you use intersectionality as a lens rather than diversity, you will have a very different understanding of how race, gender, and class and ethnic backgrounds interact. If you think of who are your international students, you are thinking of a certain geography. Think of who are your students who are coming from immigrant backgrounds within Austria, within Germany, within Switzerland. The number of those students coming to universities is very tiny compared to the number of immigrant families in the population. And this is because you really have class and ethnic background tying in together to give them a disadvantage in university education.
Yeah, yeah.
So the question is, do you visibilize it, and how do you visibilize it?
Well, I was just thinking before when we were talking about expats, in Austria.
Expats are white.
Pardon?
Expats are white.
That's what I mean. Like, I never ever heard somebody say a white person from America living in Austria is an Ausländer. There have always been expat.
Of course. Mm-hmm. Expats are white by definition. They are never immigrants, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would challenge that, because there are some expats more and more colored, whatever you want to know to name them, that it is changing, and it is.
But those expats, marie-thérèse, are what they are called highly qualified migrants. Yes. They always have to have a little adjective in front of their names. So you have to be highly qualified in order to be a brown person who is put into the category of an expat. Without that label, you are never an expat.
Yeah, I was thinking, would you call somebody who comes here to work, I don't know, from France, or if he or she is not being sent by their company, would you call them an expat, or would you call them a foreigner? It would be a foreigner.
You don't usually use the term Ausländer for them.
I don't know. No.
First of all, they get absorbed into the category Europeans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is, categories are very useful in a way, but are also very dangerous, because as soon as you have a category, you can look for differences, and hence you can discriminate as well, right? You create discrimination in a certain way as soon as you create categories, because people in a different category will be different. Right. Yeah, but we do discuss it. I mean, it's one of the big six in diversity, in the things that you can be taken to court for if you discriminate based on race or ethnicity, etc. So it is being discussed, and it is a business issue.
All right, so I'm going to read now from Alina in our chat forum here. Dear Ms. Klaes, and I think this actually is something that everyone in the panel might want to address. Here it comes. To what extent do unconscious biases play a role when working and living in foreign cultures? After all, these are formed in part from the culture in which we grew up. This is from Alina.
I think If I go to a different place to live in, doesn't matter if it's Rome or if it's Berlin, Paris, or Singapore, I made this decision to go there, and I'm going there in order to get rid of my biases. I wouldn't go there if I want to hang on to them and cherish them. So I think somebody who's doing this out of your own drive, you will learn. You're ready to learn, and this is why you go there. If not, you stay at home.
Well, that's what makes you a world musician.
Yeah, and I think there's many people, not only musicians, that just like to go to different places in order to learn and to become maybe another one, or at least to have a chance to look at yourself from the outside.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a problem with the way that question is framed. It assumes that culture forms personality one-on-one. First of all, it assumes that there is a homogeneous American or a homogeneous Indian or a homogeneous Japanese culture, which I don't think is true. And secondly, it assumes that my culture is somehow determined, my personality is somehow determined, as would my conscious or unconscious biases be determined by my culture, whatever that culture may be. And I think both are incorrect assumptions. I think many of us who have grown up in very many countries will say that, first of all, there is no homogeneous Indian culture in my case. And secondly, I don't think that, because my culture, there are so many class influences in my life, which has nothing to do with culture. There are many gendered influences in my life. And you can say, yes, there may be certain role stereotypes in India about women, but I have as much of a freedom as a person to take these on or not take them on. So it's not like my view of the world is determined by my culture. I can pose myself against that culture in so many ways. And so many of us live with personalities which we form, really rejecting a lot of the cultural values that we come from. So I think there are two misleading assumptions in the way the question is formed.
Okay, I'm sure Alina didn't do that on purpose. I think that was just, she actually addressed it to Ms. Klaas. I'll say it again. To what extent do unconscious biases play a role when working and living in foreign cultures?
Yeah, and I think what she wants to say, I don't think she's starting from the idea of one essentialist culture, yeah, Shalini, I don't think that's what she means, but where you come from, or your background, your education, the kind of system you lived in, the kind of laws that there are in your environment where you are in, what kind of religion, what are you educated in, yeah. And I think what she's referring to here is the unconscious biases. And of course, Hubert, we all want to get rid of our biases, and that's why we travel, etc. That there's so much that we take for granted that is so natural to us, and that is so obvious to us that we've never questioned, and is totally unconscious until we clash with somebody from a different, who has a different reaction, who has a different perspective on things. And then we realize that, oh, well, I've always had that assumption, yeah? Where does it come from? I'm not even sure where it comes from. It's just there. It's just there. I went to visit Carnuntum, which actually is an old Roman city here, not far from here. And there was a tour there, and the guide asked a boy who was 18 who he thought would be cleaning, underneath the baths, under the heating system, which is under the floor, and which is not very high. And, in a fraction of a second, he said, the women. Where does that come from? Where that's a kind of bias that you are being educated with, and where does it come from? But it's there, and he's growing up with this, even nowadays in Austria. So we do have these biases. The problem is that they are very often unconscious, yeah? Very often unaware. We are not aware of the biases that we have, and we expect a certain kind of reaction in a certain situation, and that reaction doesn't come. That's a kind of bias we have. And you know, we are all children of our own environment, yeah, of our own culture, if you want to call it that way, which is our environment, be it at home or at school, the whole education that we got. And we are, in a way, programmed to see things in a certain way without always being aware. And that's why I agree with her, but it's very important to travel and be challenged and see something else and become aware of the way you think and your perspectives.
Majid?
No, I wouldn't add anything to what I had
said.
Okay.
All right. Well, then I want to move on to this next question. And
this possibility of not being understood or clashing with somebody else. You don't need to really travel abroad to have a confrontation with people that have a completely different idea towards things. Actually, the biggest fights I had in my home village. And it's maybe got something to do with, I feel that if somebody challenges me, who is my neighbor, I will stand up with all my height and say, well, you might think this, and maybe you're right, but I'm gonna stick with the way I feel towards this. If this happens to me in Dakar in Africa, I'd be much more defensive and think, well, maybe I think about it.
Yeah, I take this.
I agree.
I agree.
And this is also my definition of Heimat, of home. Mm-hmm. The moment you bring yourself in, it becomes a piece of your home. If you're just outside, if you're just watching and thinking and not getting involved in it, you'll always be a stranger.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, well, I was just going to go to another question, but before we do that, I am reminded now, when I was in public school in Canada as a kid growing up, there's something that I was taught that I think about all the time, and it really stuck with me, and that is the question of cultural identity was being discussed. I think I might have been like 14 or 15, and my teacher said, you know, in the United States, the idea is that it's a melting pot, and people who come to the United States, wherever they come from, it melts into one identity that's American. But the idea in Canada is a tossed salad, and each ingredient on its own is delicious, but when it's together, it's even better. And that's a comparison or a description, analogy that's really stuck with me. Why am I saying this right now? Right, because I'm talking about cultural identity, and that's where we were at, right?
Yeah, I lived in Canada for 2.5 years, and I felt it's the most tolerant society I've ever lived in. But I suffered from this tolerance because I grow on confrontation, and this is something that really happened there.
Das ist so österreichisch.
I don't know.
That was a joke. All right. There's an interesting question or comment here from Jeremiah. Panel, the theme, job application, the process here in Austria. It seems like one is judged by their last names and race because of photos in the CV format. What do you guys have to say about that? And before I get to your answers, I have a little story. I lived in London for a couple of years. And the first year that I was in London, I could not for the life of me get a job. I had sent out my CVs everywhere. Then I was visiting my friend in London, who was third generation Pakistani British. And she said to me, Reem, just change your name on the CV. And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, just make it like a white sounding name. So I thought, okay. So I called myself Kelly Von Trapp because it was just so ridiculous. And lo and behold, I got an interview that led to the second interview. And then by the third interview where I got the hire, I was red in my face, and the man that became my boss was like, what's the matter? And I said, listen, I have to be honest. I lied on my CV. And he was like, oh, you can't do Excel? And I said, oh yeah, I lied about that too, but I can learn Excel. The problem is my name's not Kelly Von Trapp, it's Rima Hegazi, and I couldn't get a foot in the door. And he said, you know what, just because of that chutzpah, I'm still gonna give you the job. And that's how I became a writer for Bob the Builder, a children's television show from the 90s. So, right, getting back to Jeremiah, what is your comment on the idea of when you're judged by your last name, your race, because of your photo or your name on a CV and job applications here in Austria?
It's prejudice.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. Well,
how do we get around that? That's a big one. Because it would mean the fundamental shift of our entire society.
There are several studies in several countries actually where exactly the same CV is sent under different names, like you did, right? Mm-hmm. And who gets the interview? Who gets even an answer? Yeah. In many countries, it's the same problem. It's the same problem. It's prejudice. Yeah. And that is our society. And where does it come from? Yeah. So, and what are we doing about it?
And I hear it's the same in the academic world, that if you issue a paper under a name which is clearly female, your chances to get quoted are much less big than when it's a male name.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know about that actually, but that would be a good research. Maybe there is research about that already.
There is research on that, yeah.
There's a lot of research on gender bias. Oh yes.
Oh yeah, gender bias, yes. But in academic papers, I'm not aware of. Yeah. But gender bias, yes, of course, it's another bias. But those are very often, well, conscious. Then they are prejudice, and sometimes unconscious, because in the back of your mind, somehow hidden from even your awareness, there's the idea that this is a woman and she might have a child or whatever. Yeah, it's still there. Yeah. So unconscious bias and prejudice is of course based on stereotypes, and they're just there. Yeah, and that's the whole society. It is getting used to having people with different names. It's getting used. It takes a generation or two, doesn't it? And even then, yeah.
Maji, do you want to comment?
Yeah, although I don't have any experience with Austria, but I can relate to this idea of surname things because it is there in my culture. The focus on the surname, it plays a great role in accepting the candidate and in other things within his employment contract as well. And in certain conservative parts of the Middle Eastern culture, or say the Arab culture, even certain conservative towns do not accept, do not prefer to hire people from outside the town even. So it has to be someone who's not only from the country, but from the town itself. So people from outside the town, even in the same country, are not very much welcome. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it used to be like that in Europe, right? If somebody married somebody from the next village, they were marrying a foreigner, right? You know, in the past, from another town in the same country, you married a foreigner. So that has changed a lot, hasn't it? Yeah.
I hope it will change there as well.
It is changing.
Well, I think the change is way too slow, if you ask me. I work in a very left liberal kind of atmosphere, my bubble. And a couple of years ago, I was searching for an interview partner in Brazil, I think, somewhere in South America. And as I was searching and scrolling, a colleague of mine came and looked over my shoulder, which I don't like anyways. Nobody likes that, but whatever. And she noticed what I was doing. And then she said, "Oh, Reem, you know what? When I'm looking for somebody, I try to find someone with an English sounding name so you know their English is good." And she said that to me, Reem Gabor Abdelghani Hegazi. And English is my first language. And, you know, even though it's informal, my English is good. Do you know what I mean? Okay. I've got a question here from Laura for Hubert. In your opinion, does the music industry pose a chance for immigrants to positively establish their culture, or is the current music industry inherently exploitative?
Well, I think the exploitation always needs two parts, the exploiter and the exploited. And if you don't want to be exploited, you just refuse to play the game and do your own stuff. If you want to take part in the big game, then you have to at least know the rules and get into it and see if you can change it once you're inside. I myself, I don't think I've been exploited, so I'm the wrong person to ask. What was the first part of the question?
The first part of the question was, Hubert, in your opinion, does the music industry pose a chance for immigrants to positively establish their culture?
Yes, I do feel that this is happening, at least within Austria. We have so many people coming here and producing music, coming from their own background, introducing melodies and rhythms that we haven't heard before being produced in Austria. Yes, I think in this place where I'm living, it is happening and there's a chance. But it's always easier if you go for the mainstream, and new things are never the mainstream. Maybe they become a mainstream eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly an experience I've had at 26 years at FM4. What was alternative becomes mainstream. Yeah. All right. Well, we're drawing to a close here, and I know I had a whole bunch of questions prepared and sent to you, but in the course of our discussion, a lot of things were answered before I even had a chance to ask. However, in conclusion, I'd like each of you, if you would like, to just offer your final thoughts on this discussion. I'll start with Shalini.
Well, I'll just pick up a question, which I just read here on the chat, which
says,
my definition of home is where there are roots and where your heart feels safe. And I would say, actually, I think I have different degrees of homeness in different places. So I'm not, I'm at home in Vienna, but which doesn't mean I would be home in every village in Vienna. In Austria, I'm at home in India, but which doesn't mean I'm at home in every part of India or equally at home in every part of India. I'm very much at home as far as food is concerned in India. I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not that much at home with food in, many parts of Vienna. I'm very much at home in English language newspapers, but I may be much more at home in French museums. So I think there are degrees of homeness depending on whether one is thinking of, what literature one reads. I mean, I read a lot of Russian literature, but I read it in translation, which I don't know would translate into whether I'm at home in Russia. So I think there are very many different degrees of homeness which one needs to think about. So, and then there can be places where you have no roots at all, which feel very comfortable with certain kinds of music, certain kinds of literature, certain kinds of food, certain languages. And Britain is certainly not home to me. But I learned English when I was 9, and it's the language in which I publish most. I mean, I publish in German as well. But when I'm writing, it's a language I feel more at home than my own mother tongue, Gujarati, in which I have never written and published a single piece.
You read that statement. I was going to use that as the conclusion, so thanks a lot. Any final statement from Marie-Thérèse?
Yeah, I would agree very much with Shalini that we have many homes in a certain way, and depends on where you are and how you feel and whom you are with, etc. And also coming back to this idea of identity that we didn't really touch on, it's many identities, right? Many identities. You change your hats, you change your language, you change your behavior, you change even the way you dress. Many identities, and that is, I think, making you cosmopolitan or international. I don't know what to say, but this I think is one of the things that we discuss a lot with these third culture kids. Huh? Shalini seems to be one, and you are one, right, Rim? Yeah, where you were raised in different countries and different languages and different foods and what have you, etc. And these people, do we really need to feel that this place, this particular village or this particular place is my home, and is this my identity, or do I have several homes and several identities? And maybe, I don't know if that, how far that is comfortable or not. Maybe it's very comfortable to be able to say, this house in this village, that is my roots. That's where my family comes from, where I was born, or something like that. That might be very but I don't think these roots are very solid nowadays for young people, because they move a lot and they speak several languages and they have friends all over the world and they chat online with so many people all over the place in different roles with different identities.
Majid?
Yeah, as an academic, I would emphasize the role of the university in building up the culture of internationality. And I would say that specifically philosophy plays a vital role in this aspect. I would call on teaching philosophy even for students of sports to be like an obligatory course, teaching philosophy, because philosophy teaches repudiating the idea of the absolute truth or normality or universality. We need a culture, we need a generation that believes that there is no certain set of rules for normality or universality. There are different kinds of beliefs, cultures. Building this in our new generation makes them more open to internationality, accepting the other, and rejecting all forms of prejudice and discrimination.
I love that point about philosophy and how it should be taught to everyone. I think that's so cool. Hubert?
Well, I want to say home is not equal to comfort. You can have a home and don't feel comfortable, and you can be a stranger somewhere and feel really good.
Very true.
This is, I think, the roots, the word roots is something different to the word home. And like music is my home in a way. And this is why I feel wherever I go and I hear music, I sort of feel at home. And not every music is comfortable also. And that's good that it's that way. But roots is something, I think, to many people, roots and also comfort is very important. It's even important for me, even though I like to go out into discomfort and challenge myself. And it's okay for people who travel a lot and meet a lot of people from all over the place, all over the world, to develop an open mind. But most of the people on this globe, they are very conservative, not by choice, but have no chance to travel and study and go to university.
Yeah.
And we must not forget that we are very, very privileged as we are talking about all these things against the majority of people who just like to have things safe and know what they do and what they can't do, instead of being over challenged and things moving too fast. Mm-hmm. For us, maybe it's too slow, but for the most people, things are going too fast sometimes.
All right, well, I'm going to conclude now, but before I do, Hubert, I have to ask you, is that a poker hand behind you on your wall decoration?
No, it's from the Schnapskarten. And yeah, it's the 4 aces. I had a deck of cards and I lost some cards and I just was going to throw them away, and I thought, I keep the aces.
Because I was thinking the whole time, Hubert von Koers, you're a poker player?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay.
I'm not a gambler at all. I like to play, but my playing is with the instrument.
Got it. All right. Well, I'll leave you and everyone with one final comment from Jules. Jules wrote, I have to leave for work 11 a.m. here in California, but wanted to thank the panelists and moderator. Always a joy to learn how other folks contend with these important issues. And I want to thank this panel too, and the VU, and everybody who was watching and joined in the discussion. I think it's very enlightening. And of course, this kind of subject brings up so many issues and so many layers that a 1 hour, 1.5 hour discussion doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. I'm more than aware of this. But in any case, I just want to thank you very much. And for some reason, I am totally craving onion bhaji right now. And Ravi Shankar. I think I'm going to go listen to some Ravi Shankar now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Hope to meet you.
Nice to meet you all. Thank you. Take care and stay safe. Thanks, everybody. All right, we're zooming out.